Now to the brutal civil war in Syria that has already claimed tens of thousands of lives. Now the US and possibly Australia may be drawn into the crisis. It is such a difficult conflict to understand, and to help us make sense of it all, we're joined by a former UN peacekeeper in Syria, Dr. Roger Shanahan. Thank you for coming in this morning.
My pleasure.
This is such a toughie. How did this all start? Let's just say Syria is a small country geographically. It has a population about the same size as Australia. How did it get to where it is now with this civil war?
Well, the Assad regime's been in power for over 40 years, and same as in the rest of the Arab world, there have been calls for reform which never occurred. The peaceful protests were put down quite brutally. Over the space of the next 2.5 years, we've seen the opposition go from peaceful demonstrations to armed opposition. The government has lost control over some of the areas. The opposition has become fragmented. Jihadists have come in from outside, and regional states have supported different sides of the conflict. It's become a rather large mess and a rather large and bloody civil war.
A good explanation for a very, very complicated situation. The crisis over the chemical weapons attack this week. The US says it has established that the Assad regime used chemical weapons against its own people, killing nearly 1,500 people, including more than 400 children. The US wants to step in. The British have said no, they won't be joining them. It's tricky, isn't it? Do we want to see the US step in? Do we want to help them? Will it improve the situation or make it worse?
Well, listen, I think it's, as you pointed out, it's a very difficult situation. What President Obama has to do, if he chooses to take military action, is to take sufficient military action to send a strong message that the use of chemical weapons is a red line that can't be crossed, and to dissuade him from using it any time in the future, but not so much of a military response that it'll tip the balance towards the opposition.
I guess that there's no real good guy, is there? They don't want to be seen to be supporting the jihadists who have joined up with the local opposition. It's tricky.
Yeah, it is very tricky, and it's a very fine dividing line between what you do that makes a difference and what you do that sends a message. And I think President Obama is going to be criticised from both sides, regardless of what military action he takes.
Do you think that Great Britain opted not to step in and involve themselves in this because of the fallout from the credibility over Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction? Is the US paying the price for that misinformation now?
Listen, I think it's certainly the case in the UK that they wanted stronger evidence, and in particular waiting for the UN Weapons Inspectors report that the UN Weapons Inspectors are returning today, our time, and the Weapons Inspectors report should be out shortly thereafter. So I'd be interested to see what the British reaction is going to be following that.
All right, we've established that there's no real way to win, there's no real right thing to do, so let me put it on you. What do you think we should do about this chemical weapons attack?
Well, if it's confirmed that it occurred, and it would appear that all information leads that way, I think there's got to be some price to pay for governments that use that kind of weaponry. So I think a limited military strike is probably the best of a whole bad series of options that President Obama's got available to him.
So what should they strike?
I think things that are linked to chemical weapons attacks, so rocket launchers, unit headquarters and command centres that have some say over this, but not political targets or any other targets that'll tip the military balance in the favour of the opposition.
And what would Russia do if the US did that?
I think you'll find a lot of rhetorical opposition from it, but there's really not much that they can do if the strike is quite limited, which is another reason to keep the strike quite small and limited in duration.
Do you think that the US will in fact do that?
The only person who really knows is the President, but all the indications, both militarily, they're moving assets into the region, and diplomatically, both the President and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defence have all been pretty forward-leaning and about the degree of confidence they have in the information that confirms the Syrian government has used weapons of mass destruction.
And what about Australia? What kind of support can we lend? Obviously, we've got a great ally in the US. Will we get involved?
We'll only be involved diplomatically. We don't have any of the kind of assets that the US is going to use for this kind of action. And even if we did, it would take a time to move them there. So I think you'll see, again, diplomatic and political support. And for something that's going to be quite controversial, I think the US will be satisfied with that.
Well, thank you very much. You've explained a very complicated situation very succinctly. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Cam. Deb.
Leila, thank you.